Tonight, we are talking about student loans, something millions of people in this country live with every single day. For many graduates, it feels less like support and more like a lifelong bill that never really goes away. Before we get into what has gone wrong, let us take a step back. This system was not created to trap people in debt. It was meant to open doors. So let me ask you this. What was the original idea behind the UK student loan system, and how did we end up so far from that goal?
The original idea was actually quite simple and, on paper, quite fair. When the system was set up in 1990, the aim was to make university accessible to people who could not afford it upfront. Students would borrow money at low interest, get a degree, earn more over their lifetime, and repay gradually once they could afford to. It was supposed to spread opportunity, not create fear. Over time, though, the system was changed again and again. Tuition fees rose sharply, interest rates were redesigned, and repayment rules became more complex. Instead of acting like a safety net, the loan started to behave more like a commercial debt. The gap between what students owe and what they can realistically repay grew wider every year, and that is how we ended up here.
If you haven't already subscribed to AHNEWSTV, click the bell icon to be notified of any new videos I post. When people hear the word student loan, many still think it works like a normal loan from a bank. But once you start looking into it, it is anything but simple. There are plans, thresholds, percentages, and rules that change depending on when you studied. For people watching at home who may already feel confused, can you explain in plain English how the student loan system actually works today?
At its core, the system works like this. The student loan company pays universities upfront on behalf of students. Graduates then repay the loan through the tax system once they earn above a certain income level. That income level is called the repayment threshold. If you earn below it, you pay nothing. If you earn above it, you pay a fixed percentage of your income over that threshold. For most people, that is 9%. The complication comes from the fact that there are 5 different plans, depending on when and where you studied. Each plan has different thresholds, interest rates, and write-off dates. So 2 graduates doing the same job, earning the same salary, can end up paying very different amounts purely because they studied in different years.
Now, one thing that has really caught public attention is interest. Many graduates say they are paying every month, but their balance keeps going up, not down. That feels wrong to people. Can you explain why interest has become such a huge problem in the student loan system?
Interest is the heart of the problem. For some plans, especially Plan 2, interest is linked to the retail price index, which often runs higher than standard inflation measures. On top of that, higher earners can be charged extra interest, up to RPI plus 3%. When inflation surged in recent years, that meant interest rates on student loans exploded. In some cases, they were heading towards levels you would expect from risky credit, not a government-backed education loan. Even though the government introduced a temporary cap, the damage was already done. Interest compounds, meaning yesterday's high rates still affect today's balance. That is why many graduates feel like they are running on a treadmill that never stops.
You mentioned Plan 2, and this seems to be where things get especially painful. These are people who went to university between 2012 and 2023, many of whom were told this was a fair deal. Looking back now, was Plan 2 simply a bad design from the start?
In hindsight, yes, Plan 2 was deeply flawed. It combined high tuition fees with an interest system that punished people for earning more while still trapping lower earners in long-term repayment. During periods of low inflation, the problems were easier to hide. But when inflation spiked, the weaknesses were exposed very quickly. Graduates suddenly saw interest rates jump to levels that made it almost impossible to make progress on their balance. The system also created a strange inequality. People who could afford to pay off their loans early avoided most of the interest. Those who could not ended up paying more over their lifetime. That turns what was meant to be progressive support into something closer to a regressive tax.
The government has acknowledged some of these problems and introduced a new plan, Plan 5, for newer students. On the surface, this sounds like a fix, but many people say it just creates a new set of issues. Is Plan 5 actually better, or is it just different?
Plan 5 does fix one major issue by removing the extra 3% interest on top of inflation. That alone is a relief for future students. But it introduces new trade-offs. The repayment threshold is lower, meaning graduates start paying sooner. The write-off period is longer, meaning many people will be paying well into their 60s. So while the interest is less aggressive, the repayment period stretches much further. For some people, that will mean paying more overall, just spread out over a longer time. It is not a clean solution. It is more like adjusting the pressure without fixing the system underneath.
A striking statistic here is that more interest is being added each year than graduates are actually paying off. That sounds like a system that is mathematically broken. What does this tell us about the future for today's students?
It tells us that for many students, full repayment was never realistic. When interest added is 3 times higher than repayments, the total debt pool can only grow. The government itself predicts that only about a third of people on Plan 2 will ever clear their loans. That means most graduates will carry this debt until it is written off decades later. For them, the student loan is not really a loan at all. It is a long-term income charge that follows them through most of their working life. That changes how people think about careers, housing, savings, and even whether university feels worth it.
This is not just a personal issue, though. There is a national cost here, too. Write-offs are rising fast, and they are expected to explode in the coming decades. How serious is this problem for public finances?
It is very serious, even if it does not grab headlines yet. Right now, write-offs are already climbing sharply. But the real surge comes in the early 2040s, when the first large cohorts reach their write-off date. At that point, annual write-offs are expected to hit around £30 billion a year. That money has already been counted as government spending, so it is not a sudden shock. But it still means less money for public services, investment, or tax cuts. In simple terms, the state is lending money it knows it will never fully get back. That is not sustainable in the long run.
So when you look at all of this together, the impact on graduates, the strain on public finances, and the growing sense that the system is unfair, it leads to one final question. If this system does not really work for students or for the country, what needs to happen next?
The first step is honesty. We need to admit that the current model is failing on its own terms. Any solution has to balance access to education, fairness for graduates, and long-term value for taxpayers. That could mean lower interest tied to real inflation, higher thresholds that move with wages, or a shift towards a graduate tax style system that is clear and predictable. What matters most is trust. Students need to believe that going to university will not financially punish them for decades. Until that trust is rebuilt, the student loan crisis will keep growing quietly year after year.
This conversation shows one simple truth. The student loan system was built to help young people move forward, not to hold them back for most of their working lives. Yet for millions, it now feels like a permanent deduction rather than temporary support. This is not just a student issue or a graduate issue. It is a national issue that affects fairness, opportunity, and the future of higher education in this country. If we want a system that truly rewards learning and hard work, then reform is no longer optional. It is necessary. Thank you for watching, and we will continue this conversation.